Anthony, welcome. Thank you for your time and being with us on our show today.
Good to be with you.
So, Anthony, we're going to dive into it here. You've written about Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, John F. Kennedy, J. Edgar Hoover, Richard Nixon, Admiral Hudson Kimmel, Frank Sinatra, and now Marilyn Monroe for a second time, if I understand. Looking back at all of these people, who was the most interesting for you to write about?
Oh, they're all so different, done over such a long period that your first question is going to be one of the hard ones to answer. The easy answer is Marilyn Monroe, but that's probably not so. The last big book that I did with my wife and co-author Robin Swan was about Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and Admiral Kimmel, who was the admiral in charge of Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, and was blamed for the rest of his life, was demoted and basically scapegoated. Maybe it's because it was my last book, but that was a fascinating study in psyches, the psychology of that man and the way in which he was bullied by the government and eventually, more or less, reclaimed his reputation, was fascinating to me. But so absolutely was Marilyn Monroe.
Most of the writing that you've done has turned into types of documentaries. When you start out writing, is that your intention to share it on multiple media platforms or just literally?
Not exactly, because as I hope you can tell from the number of my books that you referred to just then, I've been doing this for a hell of a long time. My first book was in 1976, and there were no different media platforms then. I first became conscious of it as government media platforms, I suppose. I suppose when I was doing my book about Richard Nixon, um, um, yes, or possibly Frank Sinatra, which was after that, and which may be the next book that is studied by Netflix for television purposes. Um, I so I didn't plan on that on the different media platforms because at the time barely any different platforms existed. But now you can't do anything without thinking about media platforms. So you just have to go with the flow.
Fair enough. Now, you've done a lot of work on all of these known figures of the world, and I mean, when we talk about Charles Manson, he's really not a stranger. But you had the opportunity to interview one of the Manson family members. When you were doing this interview, were you scared at all?
No, I don't think scared is the right word. It was a strange experience. I was in Los Angeles right after the Manson family had struck and killed those people. And um, funnily enough, I went to see them at the top of Topanga Canyon, where they had what was known as the Spawn Ranch, where Manson had groomed his young women and people in a ranch used for making movies,
Right.
making cowboy movies. And that was where I had lived years early. That was where I had lived years earlier when I was writing the Marilyn Monroe book. So I knew the place, and I believe was when we were talking to Squeaky Fromm, one of the girls, who later went on to take a pot shot at the President of the United States. She missed, happily. Um, but she told me a gruesome story, too too gruesome and too raunchy to talk about on television,
Jeez.
of how they had killed one of the cowpokes at this movie ranch in the middle, basically in the middle of a sex act. And that was certainly very spooky. Um,
Jeez.
but by that time, I had lived through quite a lot of war coverage in Vietnam and later worked a good deal in the Middle East. So to say that I was scared compared to some fears that you naturally have in a war situation No, the little girl didn't scare me.
And I like how you put it. The little girl didn't scare me. That's awesome. I want to talk to you about Norma
Right.
Jean.
The little girl that is my granddaughter, they scare me.
That's funny. Your granddaughters are more terrifying. That's awesome. I want to talk to you about Norma Jean Baker, Marilyn Monroe. How did she come across the name Marilyn Monroe?
How did I come across the name, or how did she come across the name?
How did Norma Jean Baker decide on the name Marilyn Monroe?
Ah, well, she was happy at the beginning to, as a would-be actress, having had no experience really beyond appearing in pin-up magazines, things like LAFF magazine, um, filled with, which typically was filled with glamour pictures, which in those years in the 40s were not sexy at all, at least not sexy in the way we think of it now,
Right.
but were pictures of people bathing beauties in rather respectable bathing costumes by modern standards. And she'd been in these glamour pics and was trying to break into Hollywood. And um, her name, Norma Jean Baker, didn't go down well with any agent or would be film person. And she finally got the beginnings of her break into movies with 20th Century Fox. And she was working with an agent. She wanted to be called, and I wrote it down today. It's a name that a completely disappearing name
Okay.
that didn't improve. Um, she she wanted to. That somebody suggested that she be called Carol Lind, Lind, which
Carol
was a
Lynn.
rather obvious composite of an opera singer and a dead actress, and that didn't go down very well. Um, and she was sitting on the beach house home at the beach house home of um, the man from the studio she was dealing with, Ben, who was famous for a radio um, series called Life with the Lions. Um, and he said that I know, you're Marilyn.
Oh.
And Marilyn went down quite well, but she said that she wanted to be called Monroe for her second name, not because it rang well,
Hmm.
but because her grandmother had been called Monroe
Oh.
before she was married. And so Ben Lyon said, "That's great, Marilyn Monroe. We'll stick with it." And by God, she stuck with it. And we all most people only know her as that.
That you're absolutely right. And not a lot of people know that story. I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, when most people hear Norma Jean Baker or Marilyn Monroe, they think of a woman who sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President, and the illustrious movie star. Do you know how Marilyn was discovered?
Well, it grew really out of that first stage with Ben Lyon. There's another quote that I pulled out because I thought you'd be asking me about this. And Ben Lyon, the man who gave her the name, said he recalled later that, quote, she had a good face. You can tell with some faces the way the flesh sits on the bones, the planes and the angles, that they'll photograph well. In addition, there was the way she moved. That was that was so it was nothing to do with her acting. Um, it was it was that the way she photographed or would photograph and the way she moved. And didn't an awful lot of people come to think that as well?
That's such a unique insight to it that it's more how the flesh hangs and how you're going to be photographed as opposed to the skill or the ability of acting. And it seemed to be more of an eye catcher, which is
Yes,
kind of neat.
there's a less smart way to put it, of course, which is that for people taking photographs,
Mhm.
still photographs, I mean, or she was, or for film, as it turned out, she was a general, a genuine natural. She was just a natural for the screen at a time when the screen in itself was still a developing process, very much a developing process in the mix. She was a gift to cinema.
Wow. A gift to cinema. I like that. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.